Discussion keeps the world turning.
This is Roundtable.
From the heart of Beijing to the edges of the global stage, you are at Roundtable. I'm Niu Honglin. China's path toward carbon neutrality is being watched closely around the world because of the questions it raises. How does a country transform vast industrial systems while maintaining economic momentum? How do green ambitions translate into practical changes in communities and households? So in this episode of Generation Global Navigating a Changing World, our host Fei Fei brings together two perspectives, a Chinese expert and a scholar from the United Kingdom. Their conversation explores how China's green transition is being understood at home and abroad, and what it might mean for the future of development itself. Now pull up a chair and join their conversation.
Welcome to Generation Global Navigating a Changing World. It's a series where we sit down with young voices from both here in China and elsewhere in the world. I'm Fei Fei with Roundtable, and today I'm joined by two wonderful researchers to discuss the future of our world. The question is, how green will this future look like? And are we sharing the same pathway forward, or are we imagining different destinations? And more importantly, perhaps, does it really matter? So here in the studio joining me is Guo Bowei from Renmin University of China. Hello, Bowei. Thank you for joining me today. So before we start, can you tell us about your areas of research?
Sure. I'm currently an associate professor at Renmin University of China, and my research focus is on energy security, energy transition, and China's electricity market reform.
Thank you. And also we have another guest on the line. It is Belinda Chappé from London. Hello, Belinda.
Hi, Fei Fei. Thanks for having me. I'm a China analyst and team lead at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. We're an independent think tank, and my work focuses on China's energy transition, what it means for climate change, for the economy, and global politics. So really looking forward to today's discussion.
It's really wonderful to have you both here today. And I think you somehow share some similarities in your past experiences. Before this recording, we actually found out that Belinda, now living in London, and Bowei used to study in the UK in his undergrad and postgrad, which can bring us, very diverse perspective when we're talking about today's topic, which is energy transition. But before we get into the details of this topic, I think one of the biggest question a lot of our listeners would have is that why is energy transition important to us, especially in today's world?
Okay, from my perspective, well, we are experiencing the increasing temperature, or more broadly, extreme weathers. And we can see that, especially I think audience in Beijing or in Europe can feel that in winter, the temperature can be extremely low, and in summer can be extremely high. And I see news that in every year, there are people in summer who suffered from the extreme heat, and some of them are in hospital. So ended up in hospital. So from my perspective, well, global warming is becoming a very serious issue. And if we continue burns the traditional fossil fuels, and that will accelerate the already very bad condition. So that's why we need to have this energy transition.
Yeah, I agree with Bowei. The energy sector is the largest contributor in terms of emissions from fossil fuels. And all of us use energy and electricity, right? It's part of our everyday life. So we should care where it comes from, and we should care that it's secure. And we're seeing very live this week that there's a lot of volatility with fossil fuels. There are a lot of side effects that are out of our control, that we can't control, which is different with clean energy and the clean energy systems that we're envisaging for the future. And I think other side effects include air pollution, a topic that's very relevant for many people in China, I imagine, where we also see a lot of negative side effects from fossil fuels in the energy system. So I think there are many good reasons for us to think about the energy transition and for the public to also be more interested in what the future look like and what opportunities it brings, both from a health perspective, from a climate perspective, but also from an energy security perspective and frankly for jobs as well. Like it's an exciting time for with new technologies emerging. That's also quite exciting for young people and many people starting out, I think.
Yeah, in some ways, I think the transition that we're going through, not only in the energy system, in other parts of the economy, could mean that the job you are going to take in about 5 to 10 years' time would look very different from what we're looking for today. And then speaking about this energy transition and, mitigating climate change and so on and so forth, China's story is very difficult to ignore on a global stage currently. And Belinda, I'm curious about, you're living in London, in the UK at the moment. So can you tell us why exactly is China a main part when we're talking about energy transition, when we're talking about, achieving our climate goals and clean energy development?
Yeah, China sits very much at the heart of the problem and the solutions to this. China is the largest emitter. It accounts for around a third of global emissions, and it has some of the largest, for example, coal power fleets, and is still adding more to that system. So that's really problematic. And that's becoming really exciting because clean energy is now able to meet all the increase in electricity demand in China, which is starting to bring down emissions. So really the trajectory that China takes over the next 5 years, over the next decades, will be crucial for the global world, for global emissions, but also for the global energy transition to see how fast can we actually accelerate and how fast can we bring emissions down to a safer climate.
And Boy, I want to ask you about this because we are sitting in the heart of China, the capital city, Beijing. And looking back, we are also kind of at the crossroad for China at the moment as well. We just finished our most important plan over the past 5 years, the 14th five-year plan. And now we're drafting our next 5-year plan. And now you study the energy sector and how it's linked to economy very closely. What direction is China going to take in the future, in the next 5 years?
Well, we will definitely continue our energy transition, and not only in the power sector, but also in many other sectors. And we've already said that, have this target that in 10 years, we're going to sixfold our renewable energies capacity. And with that goals, would expect that in the next 5 years, we might threefold or fourfold our current renewable capacity. So that's in the power sector. And of course, a very important aspect for this large amount of renewable is that we need energy infrastructure, such as the expansion of transmission, the expansion of distribution lines, and we also need more flexible demand. So that's in the energy sector. And we've already witnessed this many electric vehicles on the road. And now when we take Ubers, we take taxis, or even we buy cars, we might choose electricity vehicles. Actually, many of us, frankly, I just bought an electricity vehicle. So
how does it feel driving it?
Well, it feels very high tech. At the beginning, it feels different from traditional gasoline cars, but once you get used to it, there are advantages and disadvantages comparing with the two types of cars. It's smarter, and we have this automatic driving system. And after a very busy day, which is it becomes very convenient. But on the other hand, the charging time, you need to find a charging station, and also there are some other concerns. So those might be some disadvantages, but I think overall that is a pathway for our future transportation sector. And also in other sectors, we are also electrifying some other sectors, and we are decarbonizing our industries. We are boosting our energy efficiency in the cement, in steel, in iron industries. So yeah, I think it's not just the energy sector, but all sectors or industries are moving towards a cleaner future.
Like you said, I think last year when China published its climate goals, it said to vow to cut down the overall emission of greenhouse gases by 7 to 10%, but we'll strive to do more. And when it comes to how to achieve this goal, 7 to 10%, considering the size of China's emissions, that's a lot of carbon emission reductions that we need to do. So from a systematic point of view, apart from just about driving more electric vehicles or doing more infrastructure building when it comes to pushing forward with clean energy, from a systematic point of view, I'm curious about your guys' take on how exactly can China achieve this 7 to 10% or even more reductions to greenhouse gas emissions?
We have actually done some studies on this, and our analysis has found that China actually has the potential to cut emissions by 30% by 2035 compared to current levels. So there's a lot of potential. The most of it comes from the power sector, and continuing to build out clean energy is a really crucial part of that. I think our expectation would be a continuation of what we have seen the last couple of years, rather than what was targeted so far in the high-level targets, which would actually mean a dramatic slowdown. But I think there's still huge potential as well in the industrial sectors that Bowie was talking about, especially in the steel sector. We see potential for nearly 40% of emission cuts, partly because production is going down, because China's real estate sector is saturating and there's just less need, but also partly through electrification of the steel sector, which is currently in China largely coal-based. So electrifying that, using more recycled steel, has huge potential. And then there is the transport sector as well, where we're seeing, I think, the current development is well ahead of most modeled pathways. The pickup of electric vehicles in China is a lot faster than I think anyone expected. And that's really exciting to see. But I think there are also struggles in the end with how do you phase down the old system, right? And dismantling some of the old infrastructure that you have, because China's growth has traditionally been built on coal, both in the power sector and in industrial sectors. So moving away from that will be quite a big challenge. And I think there's a lot of need for policy to guide that, to have very clear, a clear direction of how is coal going to develop in the power sector, how is it going to develop in industrial sectors, and to really make space for clean energy to take up that new space, and for coal to step into the background to be a flexibility mechanism and energy security in the end, if you need it, but also only then. And I think that's hopefully what we're going to see in the next 15th five-year plan, that there's very clear guidance on does the future look like for new coal power projects? Will there be caps on coal consumption? Will there be a plan for phasing down some of this old capacity that is not needed anymore? So I think, there's different levels to that, but I see a lot of potential, and I do hope that this target of 7 to 10% is really the beginning of a conversation, and that we will see across policies and across the real the changes that we are seeing in China on the ground, that those will significantly over-deliver that target.
In Bowie, what do you see of Belinda's estimates that we're probably going to cut more than 10%?
Well, I think there's potential that we can cut more than 10%. But on the other hand, I think the decarbonization pathway for China might be different from those in the UK or in the EU. One reason is that we are still a developing country, and when you look at the GDP growth rate in China, it's 5% in 2025, and in the near future, at least, I think the average growth rate would be still be 5%. And with that growth rate, we need more energy. So when you look at the electricity consumption in the EU or in the USA, you find that it's quite stable. Every year it's probably going a bit downward, but in China it's still upward growing. So with that level of GDP growth, and also with the development of digitalization, with the development of AI, which is a big electricity consumer, and we have this industrial electrification. So China's demand for electricity will still be growing. And although we are constructing more renewables and in a very rapid speed, but we still need more electricity. And After all, renewables are not as stable as conventional fossil fuels.
Yeah, that reminds me of the story last summer, really, in Europe, when, in the countries like Spain, they encountered some major blackouts. And that got me thinking about, the role of renewable energies in the overall power system. Is that, of course, it's good. It's the future.
Yeah.
This sort of a pathway is undeniable by most countries in the world at moment. But on the other hand, they do have some features that could pose, threats to everyday life, to every home around the world. For example, during extreme weather events, some solar, some wind are just not going to be generated. So there will be homes, there will probably be people facing the problem of not being able to get the power that they need in a period of time. So about this very, very tricky question, how could countries, not only here in China, I think it's a problem shared by many, many countries in the world, how should they balance out this need that they need to scaling up on their renewable energy and also still keep a very stable supply to businesses, to homes, to the society? What do you guys think the answer to this question?
Well, over the world, I think California gave us a good example. The renewable share is extremely high. And how they achieve this is through batteries. They have a lot of batteries, so they can store redundant electricity during the day and use it in the night or in the early morning when there's not enough electricity generated from solar. But when you look at their electricity prices, I mean, not only the average prices, but also the fluctuation of electricity prices is still high. It's very high. And our concern is that China's citizen might not be able to, at least at the current stage, at the current economic development level, we are unable to support or we are unable to pay such a high electricity bill for the citizens. So, in the future, the price might go down. There might be some new technology or the involvement of artificial intelligence in the grid to lower the price and to lower the price fluctuation. But I think at the current stage, if you ask for example, there is California, but if you ask me the price, what's the cost, it's not low.
It's the burden, financial burden on every home. So Belinda, what's your answer to this question? Europe, I think a lot of European countries also face very similar issues to California, is that their power grid is very green and they're pushing forward with that, but their bills are on the rise. On the other hand, we're hearing over the news that the solar power is getting cheaper and cheaper every day. Why is this surging in bills happening?
I think it's really important to bring some nuance into this, because the reason why European electricity bills are high is because the electricity price is pegged to the gas price. It is not pegged to the price of renewables in any way. And the biggest challenge was that global gas prices spiked rapidly. And Europe is very reliant on the imports of gas from other countries that it cannot control. And it cannot control those global prices set at the global market. And this is what has been driving up the electricity price in Europe. And I remember from personal experience, many of my friends back in Germany didn't dare to put on the heating because it was too expensive. They were sitting there in the cold because they weren't able to pay for these oil and gas bills that their heating demanded. So I think this is the real challenge that we're seeing, right? We shouldn't have the illusion that the fossil fuel system that we're currently having is in any way secure, because it is not. So I think what has taught Europe that lesson is that really the future of energy security comes with renewables, because the solar panels that you have on your roof, no one will take them away from you. The wind farms that you have installed, they are there. So that's a lot more reliable than relying on someone else selling you gas at a price that you cannot define. So I think that's a big challenge. Of course, you're right, seeing the blackouts, for example, that happened in Spain and Portugal last year, there's a lot of questions about the systems and how these work. But I think it's very clear that renewables weren't actually the factor in those shortages and in those blackouts. It was much more a system failure of different plants not operating while they were supposed to operate. And this is something I think there are a lot of questions for us. How do we really develop that flexible system, and how do we ensure that electricity is there when it is needed? And I agree with Bowie that storage is a really important one for that. We can also become more creative when it comes to electricity demand, right? To teach consumers that electricity is not just freely available all of the time, and that at some points it's cheaper and at some points it's available, and at other points we may have to cut down. And that's kind of the flexibility that we need and that we can build into the system as well. But I think, yeah, from a European point of view, renewables are the future of energy security. And I think the same is true for China, to be honest, especially since China is producing all the technologies, right? It's in a really good position because when we compare it to the gas example, it kind of produces what it needs and it can install that. And thinking economically, it's become a really important driver of China's economic growth. Clean energy sectors contributed a third of GDP growth last year. So if those were to slow down, that's also a question to what extent China would still be able to hit those 5% growth targets that Huawei mentioned for the next decade, really. That if these sectors were to slow down, they could become quickly a drag on the economy rather than that driver. So I think China's in a really unique position that it sits both at the manufacturing supply chain of it, and it has the capability to still build out a lot more, and through that really gain the energy security and dependence from fossil fuel production and fossil fuel imports.
And Belinda, before we get into China's topic, China's energy system again, I do want to follow up on your flexibility, building a more flexible energy system. How would you envision that system look like? In general, we're not talking about any country in particular.
I mean, it's really complex, right? I think we're very used to the idea that we have one big plant that supplies others, and then we have grid connecting it. But I think in the future, what it will look like a lot more is, that individual households would have solar panels on their roof, that it's a lot more distributed and a lot more decentralized. And then you have those decentralized storage systems as well, small storage system, big storage systems across. And then that you have a system that can react very quickly to when there is electricity output and generation and when there is a shortfall, and to have networks that connect that. This kind of speaking about it very broadly, right? Obviously, it's a lot more technical. There are a lot of challenges still to be solved, but I think it's a challenge that most countries around the world are working on at the moment. So there's also a lot of opportunities to, share nodes and share experiences and work on this together.
Yeah, and, speaking about sharing experiences, I think one example would be the scale of China's renewable system is that we are also it's a learning curve for us as well here in China. And also what we experienced here in China can also be happening in another country on this planet. So it's very important for us to communicate and also keep minds open to more possibilities, because we're talking about the reason I'm, chasing up on you on the flexibility in the power system is that I remembered a metaphor analogy when it comes to the future energy system is that currently we're thinking about is like the water in our homes. We open the tap, the water comes out. We close the tap, there's no water. And this is also how basically electricity is run now. But maybe in the future, I can get electricity when I want it, but when I don't want that electricity, but I have some in my home, like, for example, in my renewable vehicles or in my solar panels on my roofs, I can also sold them back to the system. It can generate some income for me and also can help with others who are in need of that electricity that I'm not using at the moment. I'm not sure if that is maybe one of the scenarios that Chinese scientists and industry insiders are also picturing for the future.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But Honestly, it's not in the near future, but probably in the next 5-year plan, then we will talk about this. Recently we in the electricity industry, there is a big news. There are a company called the Octopus. Yeah, they entered the Chinese market. They used to be in the UK and in Europe do businesses. And what they are doing is exactly what you said. So they help the home to construct their own microgrid. Probably they will have their own solar PV, rooftop solar, and they can generate electricity for their own. And then they can also sell it to the grid. And how do they achieve this? They use artificial intelligence. They use algorithms. And that's how they make a lot of money. And recently they entered the Chinese market just after the visit between the two top leaders.
Oh yeah, I think
top
the
leaders.
UK got a delegation to China.
Yes, that was settled during this meeting. So definitely they might bring their experience and their algorithms and probably their technologies and talents to China. We also have our own talents, so we can face the challenge in China together.
On that anecdotally, because Octopus is actually my electricity provider, and not to make any advertisement for Octopus, but it is quite interesting, right? Because we have a smart meter which measures our electricity consumption in our household. And if there is more electricity generation in the grid in the UK, then Octopus notifies me and tells me, say, the next 2 hours you can use electricity for free. And then I decide to do my laundry then because it's free. So this is kind of the idea of the system, right? And that's quite exciting. And they can also tell me like, oh, maybe in the next 2 hours there will be a bit of a shortfall. Maybe don't do your laundry then or whatever. And this is on the household scale, right? But you can also do that on an industrial scale. And I think, yeah, that's why Octopus is really exciting. And I'm also really interested to see, same as Bowie, what they're going to do with Chinese partners in China, because there's so much potential for that.
Oh, that's so interesting. Like you have an app on your phone, Belinda, that sort of alerts you like free electricity for the next 2 hours. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll take out my spreadsheet if I got that app on my phone. But speaking about challenges in the future, I think Octopus can be one example, and there's only one company. The fact that it made a lot of money tell the truth that the potential this kind of technology that has in the market. But also there are other challenges. We're talking about, scaling up renewable energy in our power system, or even a total transformation of our power system. Belinda and Bowie, you both talked about storage before. And I remember at an event in Shanghai last year, in the end of last year, they did a bit of a small survey just at that event. They asked people about what do you see the biggest potential when it comes to new energy development here in China. The answer, there are a lot of answers like hydrogen, there are CCUS, carbon capture, and also energy storage. And energy storage is the top one on the list. That's also got me curious. Why is storage so important for this year, for 2026?
Well, I think initially there were two major pathways for decarbonizing electricity sector. One is that we still use fossil fuels, but you install our CCUS on it. And another is renewables plus storage. And I think from the current situation or the situation in the industry is that the CCUS is still very costly. And if we talk about the storage, we'll see that with those fluctuation in electricity prices, those energy storage, or especially for industrial users, they start to make money, especially in provinces where the peak prices and off-peak prices are so different. The gap between the two prices are big. So I think that's why it motivated the businesses to invest more in energy storage, and people might get to know about it. I think also it's because the development of our electric vehicles. Initially, we do have our vehicle industry, but it's not strong, it's weak. And in recent 10 years, in recent decade, we are becoming the big power, the big force in the auto industry. And with the development of China's EV, well, EV needs what? Needs battery. And the
When
cost.
we're talking about energy
Yeah.
storage, is also a form of battery.
Yes, and that brings down the cost for electricity storage. I think that's why it goes from subsidy to marketize.
That's very interesting. We can keep an eye on possibly new technologies to enhance the efficiency of these batteries, and also how different these batteries would be looking like by the end of this year, by the end of 2026. And I've also got a set of data here actually also about energy storage is coming from the National Energy Administration in China. It says that the installed capacity of new type energy storage, mostly batteries, right, accounted for over 40% of the global total. So these mega power banks, quote unquote, they call it, make wind and solar power generation more stable. So this could be one direction that the renewable energy is going at the current stage. And another point I think can be very contentious is, Belinda touched on it, about the role of coal in the system. Even though in 2025, I think the share of wind and solar power generation has surpassed thermal power in China, but is still a big part, a major part of our power system. And that is the contentious part, because some countries, some analysts believe that the world need to phase out fossil fuels like coal, like gas, like oil. And there are other countries and governments and analysts believe that we still need a small part of it, even in the far future that we're envisioning. I'm curious about your guys' take on the role of coal. Like, realistically, what role would coal play in our future life?
I mean,
Oh,
I might
go
be conservative. So I think at least in the next 10 or 20 years, coal will still play a very important role in China's electricity system. And there are many reasons. One is that, as Belinda has also mentioned, that the renewables are flexible and they are not dispatchable, unpredictable. So for the system, we need coal to be the reserve resources. And another thing is that we also need coal for the energy security issue. Of course, I agree with Belinda that we need to develop renewables for the energy security, because in China we don't have enough, oil, gas. We're sort of reaching coal, but we don't have enough oil and gas, and we import a lot. So in that sense, if we have to use fossil fuels, we need to rely heavily on coal. Otherwise, when there is geopolitical tension, then our energy security would be suffer.
Even with technologies like energy storage in place, we're still
Yes.
needing a part of coal in the
Yes, we
mix?
do, because energy storage only can store in short run. So for example, today you have redundant power, you store it in the battery, and tomorrow you use it. But how about in 3 months or 6 months? For example, in Yunnan, there is a lot of hydropower. In a year where there's not enough rainfalls, and then the hydropower stopped working, how do you rely on batteries? Because it doesn't generate electricity itself.
For a couple of months.
Yes. So for longer, period, those coal-fired power plants are still very important.
I think in the short term, that's certainly true. But I do think we're seeing quite a significant change to the role that coal is playing in the power mix. Because, in China, it was kind of the cornerstone of electricity production for many decades, right? But we're seeing a very clear shift away from that over the last couple of years. So in the last 2 years, clean energy was able to meet more than the demand increase of electricity. So Bowie was saying China still has a lot of electricity demand, right? And it's still growing. And that's very true. And that's quite different from many other countries. But electricity from clean energy is growing faster than that. So that has brought down the share of coal in the power mix. And this is quite the interesting structural change that I think we are seeing. And this is the trend that I believe will continue. And President Xi has set out back in 2021 that coal consumption will gradually decrease during the 15th five-year plan. But I think it's very clear that the role of coal in the power mix is going to go down. We're also seeing that utilization of coal power plants in China is very low. It's dropped significantly in the last 2 decades. It's only around 50%, which you can see isn't very efficient, right? So I think there is a question on to what extent can some of the old capacity be taken off the grid to make these other plants more efficient. And there's still a big challenge, I would say, around the coal power plants that are still in the pipeline to be added to the grid. And there's a really big question to what extent that makes sense, because we have seen this rapid growth of clean energy and still a continuously growing coal power fleet at the same time, right? And we're coming to a situation where we have really electricity energy abundance in China and where there isn't enough room in the grid to add more to it. So there will be very difficult questions to be had on the trade-offs and at what point coal is going to step aside and really let renewables take the lead. I think, yeah, I agree that definitely during this transition, it will play a role, but I think we're also coming into a phase where it really has to take a step back. And that's why those policy signals in the 15th five-year plan, I think, will be really crucial to watch to what extent there will be some kind of caps on coal consumption, restrictions on new projects, and also a plan to phase down some of the old capacity. And then I think what Bowie was saying about storage is really interesting, right? Because just in the last 2 years, we have seen so many breakthroughs because of CATL, because of BYD really driving innovation in the battery space and also experimenting with alternative batteries, such as sodium batteries that weren't very useful in EVs because they're very heavy and very big, but they're actually great for electricity storage. So they're going to be used a lot more for that. And I think as we are seeing more energy storage being added to the grid, we're also going to grow in the confidence that this is what can provide the flexibility. And there will be backup coal definitely in the short term, but I think it will definitely have like a smaller and smaller role.
That's very interesting. That Belinda talked about some very interesting points over there. But when it comes to batteries, I do have a story that I want to share is that right now we are in the period of 2 sessions here in Beijing where, a lot of lawmakers meet in Beijing and talk about the future plans, new laws, legislation, so on and so forth. And I think when I was reporting in one of the 2 sessions, I think it was probably 5 or 7 years ago, I talked to one of them and I asked about, the future of batteries, the future of EVs. And that expert told me that that would be a dream if I have a battery that can run 300 kilometers. That's a dream coming true. But now we're talking about 500, 600, or even 1,000 more.
1,000 more. BYD is releasing a new car. I'm not advertising, but I think recently they are going to release a new car, which has a battery can support over 1,000 kilometer drive.
Yeah, so when it comes to the breakthroughs, the advancement of technology is not really something we can predict sitting here today. The 3 of us. And another question that I have is about basically why are we having these differences when it comes to, how fast we need to phasing out fossil fuels. I mean, it's also one of the sticking points at every climate negotiations internationally as well. Some are, championing for faster phasing out, some are championing for slower. Why are we having such a big difference and it seems very difficult to resolve?
Well, I think the different countries have different resource endowment. They are in different development steps. Earlier, I mentioned that we are still a developing country and our electricity consumption is increasing. And with that speed of increasing electricity consumption, we will definitely need more fossil fuels. And another story I want to share is that, we witnessed this because I studied in the UK from my undergraduate to PhD. And during that time, I witnessed the drastic decline in the share of coal-fired power plants in UK. And I think one reason they can achieve this is that those power plants are old facilities. So they have been there for over 30 or 40 or sometimes 50 years. And then it's almost the end of their lives. So, but in China, it's a different story. We have most of our power plants were constructed in the 21st century. So in 2010, and even, after 2020, we are still constructing some new but more efficient coal-fired power plants. So those are investments which were expected to live for 5 or 60 years. But now if we are taking very aggressive steps and we are phasing out those plants, then it's just not smart, not only for the business but also for the investors.
So it's just saying that they're only like 10-20 years. It will be very wasteful in a way to just shutting them down.
Yeah, those becomes what we call stranded assets.
No, just if I can come in and be a bit controversial on that point, I think it's a really important point, right? Because we have this idea that there is somewhat of a lifetime of a coal power plant, and we take that from Europe. But actually, that's not quite true, because the UK, for these coal power plants to have such a long lifetime, they had to be retrofitted many, many, many times. And that included a lot of investment that needed to be made. So it's not like you build a plant and then it runs for however many decades. No, it wasn't quite like that. They had to be re-equipped and fixed, and all of that was really, really expensive and very emission intensive, of course. And I think in the Chinese case, there is a high risk of stranded assets, but that is largely because the utilization of the plants is so low. You don't really need to run a plant that, a whole fleet that runs under 50% capacity, right? That's not very efficient. And if you have many old plants and you need to retrofit them, that's also not very efficient. And I think we also need to think about the risk to the clean energy sector, right? Because if coal continues to compete with clean energy in the same way and is kind of shielded from the power market pricing and things like that, then there is also a risk for the build out and the utilization of renewables. We see already a lot of curtailment happening, especially towards the end of the year, where clean energy could produce a lot more electricity, but it's not, because coal power plants are running high. And a lot of coal power plants feeding their electricity into storage, actually.
That we have a lot of curtailment in the past years, which is true, but I think the reason is probably different from what she said. She said it's because they need to support the coal-fired power plant. Well, I don't think that's true. That's because the electricity system needs coal-fired power plants to be stable at that moment. So that probably brings us another topic, which is the infrastructure, or the electricity infrastructure. Well, if you want to develop electricity system with high renewables, you will need the infrastructure that can support the high renewables. And in China, well, there are provinces that has this sort of infrastructure, but when the renewable share becomes very high, then that brings a new challenge to the infrastructure. And, constructing infrastructure is type costly. And I think both our government and the industry is worrying about curtailment. Local government have their own target. They have to control the curtailment rate to be within some target.
Yeah, I think that's a very wonderful discussion from both of you. It's just we can go down this path for, a whole day without really reaching to an agreement. That's what happened on every international climate negotiations, basically. But I do have to jump in and stop you here, is because there are a lot of issues surrounding that. Apart from economic wise, there are also, when it comes to the livelihoods of the local peoples, when it comes to how to make this transition as smooth and as painless for the general public, and also on the basis that here in China we view things like electricity as public good. So there is no sort of flexibility when it comes to price surges in these kind of service. We call them services. So we'll just stop here. It's a thinker for our audiences and listeners. And I do welcome any of our listeners. If you're interested in this topic and want to pitch in as well, you can send us an email, comment down below. You know the drill. But another thing that I want to talk about, aside from energy, when we're talking about transition, green development, is not just about energy, even though energy is an important part. What other factors, in your opinion, also stand out to you apart from energy?
I think we mentioned before in the transportation sector where we are already moving forward, and in industries, our exports still relies heavily on those heavy industry, such as iron, cement, glasses. Those are all big, huge energy consumers, and they burn a lot of coal, oil every year. So that needs to be decarbonized. How do we decarbonize that? And the expectation now is to electrify those sectors. And also there are households, like for buildings, we are replacing the heating system by electricity. So that's all sectors that need some sort of certain efforts.
Belinda, what's your opinion? There are other, sectors or factors in play that can also help us to reach the climate goals?
Yes, I think I agree with Bo-Wei. Like industrial sectors are the second largest contributor to China's emissions. So those are really important to tackle. He mentioned already steel and cement. I think like both of those are very hard to abate sectors, right? That's what we call them. They're just hard to decarbonize. And I think it really requires, like he said, a lot of efforts, both from the industry, but also from policymakers to think creatively, what kind of policies can we put in place to incentivize this, to make it work. I think one where we're a bit more worried is the chemical sector, because there's been a lot of growth from chemical production and chemicals consuming a lot of coal in China, which is creating huge emission growth, 12% last year. Well, overall emissions fell, but the chemical sector grew quite a lot. So I think those are all like challenges in industry, right?
I enjoy your talk on, how we decarbonize the industries. But when we're talking about its relevance to everyday people's life, which is most of our listeners to this podcast, apart from transport and heating, what do you think would be the biggest change to their life?
I think the understanding of climate change. Well, in China, in recent years, the things have been changing. I remember like 5 years ago or so, there are people with high level of education hesitating about the fact of climate change, or even asking me whether, personally, tell me the truth, whether it's actually the case, or is it a lie? But now I think the public awareness have been arises.
And also, I think also because of a lot of things that we're seeing and experiencing every year, the extreme weather events, the floods, the heat waves, the droughts happening not only here in China, around the world, is just very difficult to ignore right now. And Belinda, what do you think for the ordinary people who are not necessarily in the industry sector or in the power sector, when we're trying to convince them, this is something you also need to pay attention to, and this is the change that will bring you to your life and is a better future?
Yes. Yeah, it's a really good question because climate change is so abstract, right? It's really hard to understand what this is. And you're right, we're starting to see some of these extreme weather events. So hopefully that's a motivator for people to aim for fewer of these events. But I think there are other things in day-to-day life that we can expect. And one of the big success stories, I think, is air quality. China has tackled air quality magnificently over the last few decades. And I think every person in China has experienced it and knows how terrible air pollution can be for your mood, for your health, for your children's health. So I think getting a cleaner environment, including cleaner air, is just such an important benefit to our life quality, right? Like going to Beijing and seeing how much the air has improved over the last decade. It's really great. And seeing how many rivers have been cleaned up and people go out, in Liangmaqiao and go swimming there in a river that used to be very polluted that no one wanted to touch. I think those are the positive sides that we can expect. And the other one, I also felt very clearly in Beijing when I was visiting, it's become so much quieter because EVs are a lot quieter. So there's also less noise pollution. And I think on top of that, there's also an economic dimension that there will be jobs in these high-tech sectors that will look quite different, right? If we talked about coal, it's quite controversial, but coal mining jobs are not pleasant jobs, right? No one would ever say that. They bring together the community and they're often very closely knit communities, but they're very dangerous, they are very dirty, they often lead to health issues later in life. So hopefully this clean energy transition will also bring about jobs that are interesting, exciting, safe for future generations.
To close off our discussion today, as we are sit here at the crossroads of the 5-year plan cycle, which area or which sector of the energy transition here in China you would be look really close over the next 5 years?
Yes, I mean, I think it's not just one aspect, right? It's going to be quite a few, but I think for me, it's going to be to see how China is thinking together the energy transition, climate change, and its economic development, right? To really align all of these goals together. And the government has already done this, and companies have done this over the last couple of years by building the supply chains for clean energy manufacturing and so on. But I'm really curious to see how this is going to continue and what kind of vision for the future the government is going to set. So I'm really excited to see what the 15th five-year plan holds, but also the technical and provincial ones that are going to come out over the next few years, to see what direction that will take us.
There are some figures we can look at. One is the renewable penetration, the share of renewables in the power system. Another is the infrastructure in the power sector. So the transmission line, the distribution, the ultra high voltage, transmission line between the west and the east of China. And we also look at the energy storage, the development of energy storage and development of demand response. And on top of that, I think there needs to be a good market. Well, China's electricity market has been developing for over 10 years. Now it's 11 years. And we're still further reforming the market to make it suitable for future high renewable system. So on the policy side, there might be, a good market for the development of renewables. And personally, I would be more focused on the development of technology. We mentioned that, now the solution for decarbonization might be renewable plus storage. And personally, I would be very excited to see the development of CCUS. Well, if that would become the solution, then at least probably our coal-fired power plant won't be the
biggest sticking points now.
So, and also the development of artificial intelligence might play a very important role in the future energy transition.
So that's some thinkers that we leave to our audiences and our listeners. And thank you, Bo-Wei, and thank you, Belinda, for joining us for the discussion today. And thank you, our listeners, to tuning in to this episode of Generation Global. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Feifei.
Thanks a lot for having us.
You've been listening to Roundtable with our new series, Generation Global, Navigating a Changing World. Today, we've got Feifei talking to Guo Bo-Wei from Renmin University of China and Belinda Sherpei, a China policy analyst with the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. Their exchange touched on how green policies must remain grounded in the everyday realities of regular people. From reflecting on the evolution of China's industries to imagining future possibilities for communities and businesses, the discussion also highlighted how green energy can become not only a solution to environmental challenges, but also a new engine for economic and social development. That's just my 2 cents. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's topic. Leave us a comment wherever you listen to your podcast or send us an email to roundtablepodcast@qq.com. Deep dives and nuanced views. We are clearing the table for now, but may the ideas stay with you. I'm Niu Honglin. Thank you for listening. Bye.